live meetups and all sorts of things. So that's great. So I'm going to go through this SOC2. It's commonly referred to as SOC2. Basically, I helped a small startup kind of get everything in place for this audit. So I guess let's dive in and see what it's all about. Okay, cool. So what is SOC2? That's probably the first thing I had when they asked me, can you help us with this? I didn't know what it was, so I had to do a bit of Googling. And what it stands for is System and Organizations Control 2. So we missed the first movie, but we got the sequel. But there's actually two SOC, it's actually three SOCs. So there's SOC 1, which is all around your financial stuff. So like, are your accountants the right thing? And that kind of stuff. And then there's SOC 2, which is all around your IT security processes. And then there's SOC 3, which is kind of like a light audit for marketing purposes. But SOC 2 is generally like kind of what's happening in the IT industry now, especially for SaaS providers. So it's basically an attempt at standardizing IT security audits. So normally, if you try to sell a product to a big bank or, you know, like a significant corporate, they'll want to do some kind of audit to see that you develop the software in a good way, that you can actually make sure it's available and it's up and it can't be hacked and that kind of thing. And they normally will send in auditors to do that. And I've had that experience quite a few times on products that I've worked on. You know, the banks or other financial institutions or big companies will send in their people to go ask you questions and that kind of stuff. So this is obviously not ideal because every company has to do it for every supplier. So this is an attempt at standardizing it. So a supplier can just get it and then give it to you know, publish it on their website or give it to potential customers, and you don't have to go through that whole weird auditing dance that normally takes like 2 months before you can even get contracts signed. So for some weird reason, it's run by the American Institutes of Chartered Accountants and not by developers or engineers. And that's, I guess, because they came up with SOC 1, which was the financial controls. And I suppose they just saw a gap in the market. They're auditing companies already, so they may as well make a SOC 2 for security. So they're kind of in control of it, which is a bit weird. So when you get audited, it has to be signed off by an accountant, by a CPA, and not an engineer. So yeah, a bit weird. Okay. Sorry. So why would you need it? So like we said, when you're selling to larger enterprises, particularly financial institutions in the US at the moment, you need to get a SOC 2 audit because it's just like table stakes. Like it's a checkbox. They don't want to go and audit each supplier to them. So you need to kind of get it if you want to sell to the big enterprises in the US. Also, enterprises there that are handling sensitive information, so medical or personal information and other kind of financial information, they'll ask for it. The thing is, it's no longer just in the US, it's kind of becoming a worldwide standard, because if you're a SaaS provider, you're probably going to end up selling to some US company at some point. So even if you're not based in the US, they're still going to ask for a SOC 2. And it's kind of spreading through the world like that. And it's also just convenient, because if a bank can just say, we want your SOC 2 and we don't want to audit you, it's very easy to do that rather. So it's convenient for customers to do. So it's becoming very popular. Okay, now there's SOC 2. There's 3 types of SOC, like we said, SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3. But in SOC 2, there's actually 2 types inside there itself. It's a big nesting exercise. They're big on hierarchies and stuff, apparently, in the accounting world. So there's a SOC 2 type 1, which is basically a static analysis of all your policies and procedures and your overall kind of plan and operating environment. So it's just like, we've got these documents, we say that we should code like this, we say that we should have backups, we say that we should vet employees and that kind of stuff. And they just check that you got that kind of paperwork and documentation and some kind of plan in place. And then SOC 2 is basically testing you on what you said. So they look at all the plan that you said in a type 1, and then they look over 6 months and they look for evidence. Did you actually operate the way that you said you're going to operate. So it's obviously a SOC type 2 takes longer, and it's also a lot more intense because you actually have to do the things you said you're going to do. Cool. So SOC 2 is basically a whole list of criteria, like tons of criteria, and it's structured in a kind of a weird, well, not a weird way, once again in a hierarchical way. So it's basically called the TSPs, which stands for Trust Service Criteria. So the P is weird. It's not what it's, it's not in the acronym. And that's because it used to be called the Trust Services Principles, and then they renamed it the Trust Services Criteria, but they kept the acronym. So one of those weird things in the documentation that you'll see. So prior to, I think, 2017, it will be referred to as Trust Service Principles, and then afterwards as Trust Service Criteria, but still always use the TSP acronym. And there's 5 categories that they kind of put this in, that they divide these things up into. So there's a security category, which kind of sees like how good you maintain security of your systems. Have you got firewalls? What are your processes like? All that kind of stuff. Then there's availability, which sees like how do you ensure that your systems stay up for the amount of time that you say it's going to stay up. So how do you hit your availability guarantees? Confidentiality, which is basically how do you not leak information? And this doesn't refer to like POPI information or GDPR personal information. This is all the other kind of surrounding metadata around that. How do you keep that safe? Then privacy, which does refer to like the GDPR and POPI kind of stuff that we know, so like kind of personal information. How do you not leak that? And then processing integrity. Do you get can you rely on the results after processing data, or is it like a little bit random? How do you ensure that those results are correct? The only mandatory one is the security criteria. It's a security category, and it's also known as the common criteria. So when you go and ask a auditing firm to audit you for SOC 2, you can choose any of these categories you want, but you always have to have security in. So we were kind of advised, just do the security one for your first audit, because just to get your feet wet and get something out the way, and then in subsequent years add on other things as your clients need. So even under security with the common criteria, there's quite a lot of criteria, and you can go to this link and you can go see basically a summary of it and all the criteria. But I'm going to scare you a little bit here and show you what's inside the security category. But don't get scared for too long, just enough to realize there's a lot. So each of these are points inside there. And there's another whole list as well. So obviously we're not going to go through all of these. These are just to demonstrate that there's a lot of criteria, and that's only in that one category. So that's why they advise to do the mandatory category first before you get brave and try to do 5 times this. So this is where we started. So then under each of those points on your screen, it's then breaks down further, another hierarchy, and it goes down to these points of focus. So you'll have something that's super vague, like this entity demonstrates a commitment to integrity, et cetera, and then it's got these sub points underneath that says like all these things that you're going to try hit. Now, the thing is, you don't have to hit all of them. You just got to hit enough of them that your auditor, your accountant that you're doing this with is happy. So it pays to kind of talk with them and figure out what they think is acceptable for your particular environment. Okay, cool. So high level recap. This is kind of the hierarchy that you're looking at. You got 5 categories. Under each category, you got a horrible amount of criteria, and then you got like these points of focus, which you got to hit some of them at least to get. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of things to look at. Okay, cool. So we kind of know what a SOC 2 is, why you'd need it, and what it consists of, in a high level sense. But what do we actually need to do? Like, this is still confusing. I was still very confused at this point what we actually need to do. So it's vague and open-ended. And we need to map all these things to concrete activities that we do every day. And the normal path to that is to create policies which define your procedures, and then the procedures turn into everyday actions that you do. So you kind of got to go down that chain. And the reason they leave it quite open-ended, it doesn't just say, like, for example, you must back up your data in this particular way, or you must do this, you must have a waterfall approach to software development or whatever. The reason they don't do that is so that you can kind of tailor it to your particular company and environment and the size you're at. So it works on tiny companies, like a 3-man team that we started this with, up to, you know, multinationals. And it all just really depends on what you're doing there. So, okay, sorry, just got a little. So basically, the company, they're testing, can the company come up with some principles and processes and show that they can effectively use them in practice. So it's like, can you think about the things that you'll need to satisfy the criteria, the security criteria, and then can you operate them in real life? So that's really what the SOC 2 test is all about. So getting things in place to start doing this. First thing is policies you need to get in place. And this is obviously not something that small companies have in place generally, because if you're 3 people, who's really got time to write policies, and they're kind of just like kind of known and you're still figuring them out, but you got to get them down on paper, well, in a PDF, I guess, or Markdown. And then you got to get some procedures after that. So like your backup procedure or your recovery procedures and all those kind of things, onboarding procedures. Then you got to do some risk management, which is also generally not something that small companies do when you're starting out. You don't do it formally, at least. So you probably like talk about things and make decisions on the fly, but now you got to do it formally so you can prove that you've done it. You've got to do some formal training of staff to make sure that they understand all the your policies and what they need to do. And then you got to get some reporting and monitoring and logs in place so that you know what's going on in your systems and you can prove what's going on in your systems. And then you got to get some practices and processes in place, like, for example, having code standards and having, you know, like some kind of idea around how you deploy and when you deploy and so on. Cool. So there's a question over there. Do we have any local companies to perform the audits, and are they recognized globally? Yes. So any CPA can do it. Anyone that's registered as a CPA can do it. So the big auditors, yeah, offer it. I know, you know, the big kind of guys like the KPMGs and those people offer SOC 2 audits in South Africa. We went with an American company, and that was also mainly because the investors of the company I was working with were American, and also their market is in America. And there wasn't a big difference in price. The American company was actually cheaper. So it was a double benefit for us. But yeah, there are people that do it in South Africa. Okay, and then some other things you have to do as well is rehearse your disaster and security scenarios. So pretend that you've had a break-in, or pretend that like your database goes down, and how you're actually going to sort this out, and then prove to them that you are capable to actually recover in these scenarios. Okay, so to do the first point of that last slide, policies. So the main policies that you need to get into place are these. You need to get a code of conduct. So basically just your base operating level of your company. So for example, you know, like where people should be working from. Do you have a remote work policy? Are you working, do you have to come in? You know, access controls, all those kind of those things, what people should, you know, do you have a dress code? All that kind of stuff should be in your code of conduct. Now, it doesn't have to be super heavy. You just have to have something. So it could be 3 points if you really want to, and it makes sense for your company. Then you've got information security. So for example, things like how systems are accessed, what your password policies are, what your 2FA policies are, you know, all that kind of good stuff. how you choose information security, information system, sorry. And then disaster recovery. So like you said, how do you recover from a disaster if something goes down? Security incident response. What is your policy around responding to someone trying to hack you, or there's some kind of security flaw in your system? Privacy, your normal privacy policy that you give to users. So that's normally actually in place with most companies because that's quite an easy one to get in. And then a risk assessment policy, a formal way of how you define risks and how you treat risks and things that fall out of your acceptable risk. What's your risk threshold? And then some software development lifecycle policy. So for example, how your branching works, how your code reviews work, do you have coding standards, all that kind of stuff. And then equipment policy. So for example, do you have bring your own device? Maybe you got something like, for example, you're not allowed to plug in USB keys, which is a pretty good thing, or use removable things, or all that kind of stuff around your actual equipment that people use. And then this was like a major issue. When I looked at it, I was like, do I really have to write this from scratch? I don't actually know where to start. And the good news is you don't have to write it from scratch. There's some open source stuff out. We use this tool called Comply. And the link is over here, and they have templates which you can use and you can adjust to your kind of needs. So this really is quite a cool point to start at. Okay, cool. So then after your policies, you need some procedures. So these are the kind of procedures that you'll be looking to put into place, and then you'll have like a time where you run them. Obviously the midnight is not the actual time we run these things. It's just saying that we need to do it every month, for example, and at the beginning or middle of the month. So there's things you need to do is like make sure that people have the correct access to systems. So there's no, if you had a contractor and they're not there, make sure that they don't have access anymore, or if someone's left the company, or if someone had elevated privileges for a point in time, they don't need it anymore. You also need to make sure that they don't have it. So it's a bit of a mission. So a lot of people put in kind of single sign-on systems, which help with this a little bit to add and remove access. Then you need to do things like check and test your backups, make sure they're working, that they're getting backed up and that they're recoverable. Ensure that you're not running out of memory or space on your servers, or you need to scale things. Review your config. So that's a big thing. This normally doesn't really get backed up, your configs, if you're using kind of SaaS services or cloud services, especially if it's like a point, like a click interface where you set those configs up. It's a good idea to take screenshots or something then, if it's not in code. And then you got to do things like rehearse your disaster recovery plan, check your logs and exception list frequently to make sure you're picking up things proactively. Things around onboarding and offboarding users. You need to do a pen test every year, for example. You need to review your risks every, probably at least once or twice a year. We've set it up for every quarter because things are changing fast with the infrastructure. And then do things like collect workstation details. And this is just kind of around like, are people running the latest security patches? Are they on the version of OS that you expect them to be on? Do they have like the antivirus and anti-malware kind of running? Do they have encryption? All that kind of stuff. And who's got what machine as well? That's also quite important. Okay, cool. So now we've got like the kind of ground things in place. We've got some policies, we've got some procedures. So that's like kind of like at the theoretical level. And then how do we start putting this into practice? So the first one is risk management. This is the one that we had to learn because we weren't doing it formally, I guess. So this is the kind of stuff that you'll be looking through when you do risk management. So you'll need to look, for example, at the asset. So you make a list of these kind of things. You do an asset name and what the purpose is. And assets are things, they're virtual as well. So it's not just physical things, but it's like, for example, your AWS environment or your Azure environment, your database, your APIs that you've built yourself. These are all kind of assets that you've got to do risk assessments on. Then you have to define a risk owner. So it's normally like someone at director level or executive level that takes the legal ramifications of things going wrong on that. And then you've got an asset owner, which is normally the person that looks after that asset, that adds or removes people, make sure it's running. So it's normally like a tech lead or something like that, a senior person. And then you've got to identify your threats and score them against likelihood and consequence. And you kind of define your tolerance level around that and apply it. And then you list if your asset kind of meets your security compliance. So for example, are passwords to get in long enough? Do you have 2FA on it? Do you have are there audit logs on access and change and all that kind of thing? So is it a secure asset? And any other things you might have there as well. So you might say, for example, you require a SOC 2 for this asset provider, and then you can put that in your list as well. So what we ended up doing is making a mega spreadsheet, because there wasn't enough to like get a formal risk tool to help us. And we kind of thought that a spreadsheet would work in this case. So this is kind of an example of a row. You'll have like your asset. So, sorry, in our case, like got a Docker Hub. Obviously, these names are completely real. These are the people working at the company. And then we have identified our threats over there. And then, you know, the consequence, likelihood, and our total score. And then we got a threshold for our total score. I think if it's under 2 or 3, it's fine. We don't need to take any action. And then just recommendations. And then we go, for example, does it have 2FA? And we track these kind of things and password policies and those kind of things on it. So we understand risks we're taking using certain services, and it's updated, and we check this list quarterly and add and remove things as they change. And if there's anything that we need to treat, if there is anything that like reaches our threshold, then we'll make some tickets to rectify that and put that into like a kind of ticketing system and into the workflow, so that it's fixed by the next check. Okay, cool. So then after you've got the risk assessment, a good thing to do is get some training ready. And this is pretty straightforward to do, because it's fairly basic training that we had to do. I guess it's larger depending on the kind of industry you're working in. So you got to train everyone on basic information security. So this is like, you know, like people that deal with clients, your admin staff, salespeople, everyone kind of has to be trained on this. So it's a good idea to make like a slide and a video or something like that and send it out to anyone. And then also do like a in-person training as well, if you can. So you got to, inside this training, you got to have things like, you know, all the evils of email, like don't use it, basically, for anything secure. How do you identify phishing attacks, malware, how to, you know, avoid using external media in case there's viruses on, and those kind of things. So all the kind of basic stuff, you know, like don't share your passwords, encrypt sensitive information, you don't send unencrypted information over email, all that kind of stuff. Physical security as well. So like make sure you lock your laptop when you leave it. Don't connect to dodgy Wi-Fi. Don't leave your laptop unattended in your car, all that kind of stuff. And then anything else particular to your industry or line of work, you can add in that training as well. And then you need to record evidence of training. So the simplest way is to get a register, and that register can be like a Google Doc or something, a Google form where people fill it in and say that they've been there and understand it. So just to get acknowledgement from people that they've seen it, they accept that they understand it. And then you can use that as proof for your auditors that you've done the training. Okay, and then the next kind of thing to get in place, your reporting, monitoring, and logs. So this is kind of like everything was in place here already. And I feel like kind of good teams normally have this in place, or at least teams that have had a bit of time to get these things in place, have it in place. So get some kind of centralized app logging going, probably like Logly or something similar like that. So your files aren't distributed across multiple machines, and it's difficult to follow things across system boundaries, etc. So you want to be able to see one event across all your systems and track it across all of it, and be able to get to it and have a backup and some kind of way to get things quickly. So a centralized system is probably a good way to do it. So locally is like cloud-based, but you also get things, if you can't use cloud stuff, you can get on-premise stuff as well. Then you need to add some application monitoring to see resource usage so that you're not running out of memory or ports or like file handles and all that kind of thing. And then like if your application is restarting every 5 minutes or something like that. So you need some kind of monitoring around that. We're using PM2 because we use a lot of node stuff. So yeah, you need some kind of monitoring like that. Then you need to get like CloudWatch or something if you're on AWS for your infrastructure monitoring, just to see that your servers aren't running out of memory or disk space, etc. And then get something like Guard Duty to see if anyone's hacking you. So you've got monitoring and alerts on that. And then monitoring and management for laptops. So like Intune, which you can push out updates to workstations or laptops, and you can check like the encryption status and the antivirus status, etc. So yeah, you need to get those. And then you also need to set up proactive alerts on all these things, because it's no use if you have to log in to see something serious and no one ever logs in. So you need proactive alerts and then show that you actually respond to these alerts. Okay, cool. And then once you've got all that in place, then you get your practice and processes in place over a few different areas. So in development, this is also was like pretty much always there. And if you've got a bit of experience, you've probably got this in place already. So you need to have some kind of coding standard. And the easiest way is to get like something off the shelf from like Google or one of the big guys or something accepted on the internet, and put in a linter or something, automatic scan on your code on check-in to check that it complies with that. And then set up some kind of CI or automated build. It's probably going to be the easiest for your tests and deploys and your integration. And the reason it's the easiest is because the documentation is kind of inherent. You can always go and look at the logs. If you've got a manual process, then you've got to keep like secondary forms and that, which is always quite gross. So yeah, if you don't have this set up, it's probably a good time to set this up, and then you've got auditing by default basically. And then use pull requests or something like that. So someone other than the dev that made the change has to review the change before it gets pushed into prod. That wasn't happening because there were only 2 devs and they both were pushing into prod. So it seems weird to actually make them check each other's work because they're both basically co-owners. But you need to kind of just have a sanity check, at least in place, so that when you hire new people, that you can set up kind of structures there. And then have a separate QA environment to test things out on, other than just your local environment and prod. So you need something that's similar to your running on similar infrastructure to your live environment, so you can see what it would do in those circumstances and not like simulate it on your own machine. And then you need to use role-based access extensively. So make sure not everyone is root admin on every system, only give the permissions they need. And then set up code scanning and vulnerability alerts and that kind of thing on your repos. So, like static code analysis and that kind of stuff, and security checks. So I think OWASP has got some stuff there. GitHub on the enterprise plan also will do it. Okay, and then around your infrastructure, you need a few basic things. People normally have this, but check that you've got it on all your databases or data sources. You might have like some critical file somewhere that's not getting backed up, and it's not even in a database, or something on a blob somewhere that's pretty important. So yeah, have automated data backups. The easiest is to use some kind of cloud provider, because then it's also offsite to you, or offsite from your main hosting. So Mongo Atlas is quite good, or you can use, for example, Azure's got built-in SQL tools and that kind of stuff as well. And then set up redundancy and availability zones, so all your redundancy and that kind of thing. Set up encryption and data encryption on your laptops and on your servers and basically everywhere you can. So encrypt data at rest and in motion as well. And then set up firewalls, VPCs, and security groups. Normally people have this kind of stuff in place by default because yeah, it's quite easy to do on the cloud providers. And then lock down public access where not necessary. So for example, on S3 buckets, even things like directory listings and that kind of stuff. So just make sure you're doing that. So review that kind of stuff regularly. And then set up antivirus and malware detection, including on your apps, and set up 2FA systems that kind of support that. And ideally, most of your systems should support 2FA, anything that's critical that you are relying on. Cool. And then in your HR space, you need a few things as well. This is where I think small companies really have nothing. And it's not fun to set this up, but there are also templates you can use. So you need an org chart so people know how information flows and where responsibility is delegated down. And it's kind of weird because, yeah, in a small company, there is no real org chart, but you need to make some kind of attempt at it, even if everyone's just reporting to the CEO. And then set up structured performance reviews. So at least there's a record of it. So you can show that you give feedback to people if they're not following your compliance or that kind of stuff. So it doesn't have to be hardcore, but it just has to be recorded basically. And then write job descriptions for each role. This is also like an awful thing to do when you're small because everyone does everything. But just you can even just get people to put down points, like bullet points of what they do and use that as your kind of job description. And then have onboarding and offboarding checklists. So like we need to add people to the system and we need to remove them from the system when they leave, that kind of stuff. Just so that you got some kind of process around that and people aren't left around. And then also do things like a criminal check on new hires. And that's pretty easy to do. There's some outsourced companies that do that. Yeah, they check for that. And then have some kind of formal access request procedure. So if people need access to some kind of system that you've got, so it's like, I need access to this repo, or I need admin permissions on this, on like, I don't know, Google Analytics or something. Normally in a small company, you just ask whoever's got admin permission, but you need to formalize it. So once again, it can be like just like a Google form or something like that, where you put it in and it gets approved, and there's a audit trail. It's auditable, and there's a trail of that someone requested and someone granted access. Okay, cool. And then from the company governance side, some of the things you need to get in place. You have to have an independent board. So you can't have a board made up of everyone of your managers in the company, but they need some kind of independent oversight from the company. And you need to review critical things with them. For example, your org charts, your security reviews, and your risk analysis, and you got to show the board these things. So it's pretty simple from that side. I guess it's just trying to find the right people for the board. And then your practices around security and testing. You need to do a pen test and a web test done at least every year, which is a good idea anyway, to find your unknown risks and vulnerabilities. And then you needed to test your disaster recovery plans and security incident plans at least annually as well. So this was also a new thing for us because it was never really formal. So the way you do that is to come up with some kind of scenario and then run all the procedures and communications that would happen under that scenario that you've documented in your policy. So for example, who's in charge of your disaster mode kind of operations, what communications go out to clients, can you reach the clients, and then document all those things that happen. So they're kind of just trying to see like, can you communicate effectively internally and externally, and can you marshal resources in these kind of emergency situations? So in summary, I guess there's a lot to get in place. So it's not like a little checklist thing. And then normally there's a lot being done by default in good teams or experienced teams. Although most of it's probably informal and not documented and recorded anyway. So that's the kind of gap you have to fill, is just like kind of write down what they are doing and then start getting evidence and auditability around that. And then it's also very much ongoing. So you're not going to do a SOC 2 and then you're good for the next 5 years. You got to do it every year. You got to get recertified every year. So it's an ongoing thing. So it's really can take a long time to get up to speed with everything, especially in a small company, because there's obviously way bigger priorities like making money and not starving. So you're going to have to bank on a few months to probably a year to get your first round done. And then also appoint an auditor right at the beginning of the process, not at the end when you think you're done. And the reason is that they can help you with getting the correct size scope that you need to do, what they'll be looking for, and that can kind of help you around, the evidence that they'll be asking for, so you can get those things in place right in the beginning. And then I think a good idea is to get someone outside your company to help push things along, because if you give people homework and you say, can you please check that everyone's workstations are up to date, over there, and they'll go, yeah, I'll do it over the next week or two, and it never gets done over the next week or two because a million other priorities come out. So it's a good idea to get someone outside that can keep pushing and actually like set up time with people to go through these tasks with them, and get them trained up. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much what we learned there. I see there's some questions, yeah, let me try to answer some of those questions that I see now, and also ask any more that you got. So I've got, we answered local companies. Yes, local companies can perform the audit. Procedures look like PCI DSS checklist. Probably it will be close, but not quite as hardcore as that, because at least you get to choose them. Flashback from banking days. Yes, that's true. This goes on in the banks a lot. They obviously are a lot better at it than a small startup. Compliance checks can be automated, similar to CIS benchmarks. I think it can be automated to some degree, although because you make them up yourself, it will probably be quite a lot of bespoke stuff there. So it's more really about how you can what you've got in place and how you operate it. So it's interesting. I'm not sure if there is automation around it. I haven't seen it. And then is there a minimum headcount required for the board for SOC 2? I'm not sure. I actually don't know about that one. That's a good question. I guess at a small company, probably at least one external person, independent board member would probably do the trick, if you like a, say, sub 10 size company. SOC 2 sounds more broad and less prescriptive than CIS, and probably difficult. Yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah, it's probably more, it's you make up the rules basically, and then they check that you follow your own rules in SOC 2, whereas other things are normally like, these are the rules, you need to follow them. Cool. So I think we've had a few questions there. So we've got Ernest. I think you can get a prize. Faith, you can get a prize, and Alexander, you can get a prize. So yeah, please just DM me your email addresses, and then we'll get the prizes off to you. So yeah, if you can do that before we break, yeah, just quickly send me a message with your email address, those 3 people that got the prize. And then if you've got any other questions, yeah, now's the time to ask, I guess. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching. It's a bit weird not having real-time format. Feedback.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Okay. Cool, thanks Bradley. I'm
Cool,
going
thanks.
to just make sure that, see if I can allow people to unmute themselves in case they have any questions, further questions, but I think most of the questions were asked there. So Can you guys just email or just send your emails to any of the co-hosts, actually, a direct message them and make sure they get it. So get a read receipt or just get them to respond to you, so that otherwise you might just not get your prize. That would be great.
Okay, I've got emails from Ernest and Faith. I'm just waiting for Alexander. So that's it. Yeah, but we've got from Ernest and Faith. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Bradley.
Cool.
Okay, cool. So I think that's it for today. Robert, would you like to say anything?
No, it's a fantastic session. Thank you very much, Bradley. Yeah, and then we'll be back next month as well. It's about the only things I can think to say.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, everyone. I think we can end it there then.
Great stuff. Thanks for having me. And yeah, give me a shout if you got anything after this session. Cheers.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.